All right, so let's take a deep dive into the box office this weekend.
That sounds good.
You know, it's been kind of quiet,
Yeah.
but even a quiet weekend in Hollywood can be pretty revealing, right?
Absolutely.
We've got this recent piece from the Associated Press. They always do a good job with this stuff.
That's right.
And then they're talking about, everything. We've got Mel Gibson's new movie, which is a whole thing.
Right.
We've got Oscar contenders making some interesting moves. So yeah, we're going way beyond just the numbers today.
I like it.
This is about the stories behind the numbers.
Awesome. I'm excited to sort of unpack all that. It's interesting to see how these things that you think are kind of slow weekends can actually reflect some bigger changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. With audiences and how the industry is doing things.
Totally. Yeah. And that's what we try to do here, right?
Exactly.
So let's just jump right in. Let's start with Mel Gibson's Flight Risk. It took the top spot this weekend, brought in $12 million, which at first glance you're like, okay, not bad, right?
Yeah.
But what's the bigger picture here?
Well, I mean, first of all, you always have to remember January is a notoriously slow month for theaters.
Right.
And studios are usually, they kind of dump the movies. They don't expect to be huge hits during this month.
Makes sense.
So, I mean, sure, Flight Risk won the weekend, technically. But that $12 million, that's not really a runaway success by any means.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider what it probably cost to actually make the movie.
And then you look at the reviews.
Oh, yeah.
The reviews are brutal. And it got a C Cinema score, which is basically like,
oh, yeah.
People did not like this movie.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, what is driving those ticket sales?
Yeah.
Is it just Mel Gibson's star power?
It's a good question. I mean, his films tend to attract a certain audience. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And Flight Risk being an action thriller,
right?
That probably appealed to that base.
Right.
Plus, people love action thrillers.
Yeah, right.
They want to go and they want to get that adrenaline rush, that kind of escapism.
All right, just a fun night out.
Exactly.
Okay, let's switch gears completely.
Cool.
Totally different kind of film.
All right.
The Brutalist.
I've heard of this one.
Okay, so this movie, it's an epic. It's over 3 hours long.
Wow.
Snagged 10 Oscar nominations.
Okay.
And it pulled in $2.9 million in its first weekend of wide release.
Huh. That's actually pretty impressive.
Right.
Especially for something that, I mean, when it came out, everyone was saying it was undistributable.
Yeah. How do you even...
Way too long.
Right.
But A24, they're the ones who released it.
Right.
They had a really smart strategy here.
Okay.
They built up buzz with a limited release right after they picked it up from Venice Film Festival.
So smart.
And then they used that momentum, plus all the Oscar nominations, to justify going wide.
Wow. So are audiences, are they becoming more open to these longer, more challenging films?
It's interesting. I think it's a possibility.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a growing number of people who are just kind of tired of the typical 2-hour blockbuster,
Yeah, for sure.
Especially with streaming, where you can watch so much different stuff.
Totally.
I think the success of The Brutalist, what it says to me is that, a movie doesn't have to fit in a perfect little box to find its audience.
Right, right. It's kind of a hopeful thing, right?
I think so.
So it seems like the landscape is shifting and the studios are trying to figure out how to navigate this.
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking of shifting landscapes, we got to talk about the Oscars, right?
Of course.
Do they still have that box office power that they used to?
Right.
I mean, The Brutalist might be benefiting, but what about the other nominees?
Yeah, the Oscar bump, it's a lot more complex these days.
Right.
Nominations definitely boost visibility. People are talking about it more.
Sure.
But the impact on box office, it's not as predictable as it was maybe 10 years ago or something. A lot of times these films, they've already, come and gone from theaters by the time the awards actually happen.
Right.
And they end up doing better on streaming.
Right.
After the nominations come out.
That's a good point. It's like the Oscars are like a signal to people who are just browsing on their streaming services. Like, oh, this is a good one.
Yeah, like this is worth checking out.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about butts and seats. It's about kind of, a longer tail.
Totally.
For these films.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think a good example of this is Nickel Boys.
Oh, yeah. Good one.
Powerful film, nominated for Best Picture, but it only brought in like $340,000 this weekend, even though they added more theaters.
Wow, that's pretty low.
Right. So why do you think that is? Is it just the subject matter, or is there something else going on?
I mean, it got really good reviews, but it's a very specific kind of film.
Right.
It's told from this first-person perspective,
Oh, I just...
which, might not appeal to everybody.
Right.
And it just goes to show that even with all the awards buzz,
Mm-hmm.
a movie style and how they tell the story,
Yeah.
that can still make a difference when it comes to, how much money it makes.
Yeah. How do filmmakers balance that, right?
That's the big question.
The artistic side and the commercial side.
Yeah, how do you make something that you're proud of, but also make sure people actually want to see it?
Right, especially now when there's just so many choices.
Exactly. It's a whole different world.
Okay, I want to shift gears again.
Okay.
Another interesting point from this weekend. One of them days, it's a comedy.
Okay.
It actually held strong in its second weekend. It only dropped 32%, brought in $8 million.
That's pretty good.
Which is interesting because comedies have been having a tough time at box office lately.
They have, yeah.
So I'm kind of curious. What do you think? Is this a sign that, that comedies are making a comeback? Or is this just like a one-off?
Maybe people they're craving something light and fun.
Yeah.
After everything we've been through.
Right.
Maybe studios just need to figure out the right formula,
The right stories.
Yeah, tell the right stories and people will come.
Yeah, okay. So is one of them days a comeback or an anomaly? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
We'll have to see how things play out.
All right, now let's move on to...
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to shift focus a little bit to a film that didn't exactly light up the box office.
Okay.
But I think it raises some pretty interesting questions.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
About distribution and what audiences are looking for these days. Have you heard of Presence?
Yeah. It's a horror movie, right?
Yeah.
Got some really good reviews.
Yeah, and it's got that really cool premise, right?
Yeah, something about being shot entirely from a ghost's perspective.
Exactly. Yeah, it's super unique.
Yeah.
It premiered at Sundance last year.
Right.
Generated a ton of buzz.
Yeah.
But even with all that and the good reviews, it only made like $3.4 million.
Yeah, so not a huge hit.
No, not really. Yeah. But you mentioned it premiered at Sundance.
Yeah.
And I think that's becoming a more common path for these indie films, right?
Oh, interesting.
To find success. I mean,
okay.
They go to the festivals, they get some buzz.
Yeah.
And then maybe they land a streaming deal.
Okay, so it's almost like a new ecosystem.
It is.
For discovering these films?
Yeah, and for people who love movie, like us.
Right.
It's like a treasure trove of hidden gems.
Okay, I like that a lot.
Yeah, and it also kind of speaks to how the role of theaters is changing,
Yeah, for sure.
They're not the only way for a film to be successful anymore.
Right.
They're becoming more specialized.
Okay.
Catering to people who really want that communal experience.
Right.
Like for something like The Brutalist or for, those big blockbusters.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The ones with all the explosions and stuff.
Right, exactly.
But what about the smaller films?
Yeah.
The ones that maybe don't have the spectacle or the big stars.
Right.
Do they risk getting lost?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I think streaming can actually help those films.
Okay.
It gives them a space to reach those niche audiences who might not have even had a chance to see them in theaters.
Okay, so it's almost like a democratization of cinema.
I think so.
Everyone has access to so much more than they used to.
Yeah, and that's the good side.
Right.
But of course there's a downside too.
What's that?
There's just so much content now.
Oh, yeah.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, how do you even know where to start?
That's where curation comes in.
Okay.
That's what we try to do here on the Deep Dive.
Exactly.
Where we help you navigate this crazy world.
And find the good stuff.
Yes. The hidden gems, the movies that make you think.
The ones that stay with you.
Exactly.
Oh, I like that a lot.
So bringing it back to this weekend's box office, I mean, it's kind of a mixed bag, right?
Yeah.
You've got the old guard, like Mel Gibson.
Right.
Still drawn to crowd, but,
But the reviews aren't great.
Not so much.
We've got The Brutalist pushing the boundaries.
Absolutely.
And then one of them days reminding us that people still love to laugh.
They do.
So it's like a snapshot.
It is.
Of what's happening in the industry right now.
And it makes you wonder, what's next?
Yeah.
Will we see more films like The Brutalist?
Yeah. Are people willing to go to the theater for something that's different?
And are streaming services going to completely take over?
Or will theaters and streaming, find a way to coexist?
And maybe the biggest question,
What's that?
how are audiences going to respond to all this?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
It is.
Okay, so let's look at some of the other films that made the top 10 this weekend. We've got some familiar franchises doing their thing.
Right.
And a couple of newcomers that are trying to make a splash.
All right, let's see what we got.
Okay, so in the number 2 spot, we have Mufasa, the Lion King, proving that nostalgia is still a big draw.
Oh, yeah.
It brought in another $8.7 million in its 6th week.
It's amazing how Disney can just, like, keep these franchises
I
going.
didn't know what they're doing.
They do.
And speaking of familiar faces, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 sped into the 4th spot with $5.5 million.
It seems like video game adaptations are, like, finally figuring things out.
Yeah, they're actually making good movies now.
Right, they're not just, like, cash grabs anymore.
Right.
There's actually some effort going into them.
I like that.
Yeah.
And rounding out the top 5, we have Moana 2, adding another $4.3 million to its total.
Disney just knows how to make these animated movies that everyone loves.
They really do.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Okay, so we've got nostalgia, video game heroes, and Disney magic dominating the top 5. But what about the rest of the list?
Yeah,
Any surprises down there?
definitely. In fact, there's one I want to talk about.
Okay, go for it.
It's called A Complete Unknown.
Okay.
It landed in the 8th spot, brought in $3.1 million.
Okay.
It's a biopic about Bob Dylan.
Oh, wow. Okay. Biopics can be tough.
They can.
But this one seems like it might have something special.
It does. It's got a great cast.
Okay.
Timothy Chalamet is playing Dylan.
Oh, wow.
It's directed by James Mangold, who did Walk the Line.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, there's a lot of buzz around this one.
Okay, so maybe a sleeper hit.
Possibly. I think
Have to.
it's definitely one to watch.
I'll add it to my list.
And then we have Den of Thieves 2, Pantera,
Okay.
taking the 9th spot with $3 million.
Another sequel.
It is. It's the sequel to that 2018 action thriller.
Right.
Looks like people are ready for more.
Yeah, action sequels can be fun.
They can.
Mm.
Especially when they deliver on the action.
Exactly.
Bigger, bolder, all that.
So this weekend at the box office, it might have seemed quiet at first,
Yeah.
but there's actually a lot going on.
There is. A lot of interesting trends.
And it's really a reflection
It is
of how things are changing in the film world.
And it makes you think, what does it all mean?
Yeah, what is the future of cinema?
Big questions.
Big questions. So we've unpacked a lot today.
We have.
But the conversation doesn't end here.
Of course not.
We always want to hear from you.
Absolutely.
What movies are you excited about?
What trends are you noticing?
Let us know.
Keep the conversation going.
Because at the end of the day, movies are a shared experience.
Right.
It's about connecting with the stories, with the characters.
And with each other.
Exactly. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
And until next time, happy watching. I'm curious to hear what you think is going to happen. But before we get to that, I wanted to go back to something we talked about earlier.
The whole impact of things like Sundance and the Oscars.
Yeah.
They might seem like, kind of insidery things.
Yeah.
But they really do affect what we end up seeing, in theaters and at home.
Absolutely. I mean, festivals like Sundance, they're like a breeding ground for new talent, for new ideas.
Okay.
And the Oscars, I mean, yeah, maybe the box office bump isn't what it used to be.
Right.
But those nominations still matter a lot.
Okay.
Especially for those smaller films.
Yeah.
The ones without a huge marketing budget.
Right.
It's like a seal of approval. It
Yeah.
tells people, hey, this movie, it's worth your time.
Okay.
And even if film doesn't win,
Yeah.
just being nominated, it can really raise its profile.
It's true.
It can give it a longer life, in theaters and on streaming.
It's almost like free advertising in a way.
Exactly. And the Oscars and really the whole awards season, it
Yeah.
shapes how we talk about movies.
It starts these debates, it gets people talking, and ultimately it introduces audiences to a wider range of films.
So it's all connected.
It is.
From the indie films at Sundance to the big blockbusters.
Yep.
It's all part of this big ever-changing world.
And that's what makes it so fun to follow,
That does.
There's always something new, something to think about.
Totally. Okay, so back to my question from before.
Okay.
Any predictions based on what we saw this weekend?
Let me think. I mean, given all the buzz around A Complete Unknown
Yeah.
and the fact that it might get some awards attention,
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised to see it do even better in the coming weeks.
Okay.
Maybe even crack the top 5.
I hope so.
Me too. It's a good movie.
What about the big picture? Any trends you think are going to stick around?
Well, I think we're going to keep seeing this blurring of the lines
Okay.
between theatrical releases
Yeah.
and streaming.
Yeah.
Studios are trying different things,
Of
trying to figure out how to make the most money, you know,
course.
both from box office and from streaming subscriptions.
Right.
It's a really interesting time to be a movie fan.
It is.
So much is changing. So many new stories being told.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive
It does.
into this week's box office. But like we always say,
The conversation doesn't have to end here.
exactly. We want to hear from you. What movies are you excited about? What trends are you seeing?
Let's keep talking about movies.
Because in the end, that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, connecting with these stories and these characters.
And with each other.
Exactly.
So glad you're on this journey with us.
Me too.
Until next time, happy watching.